The North Pole sits at the very top of the world, a place where the Earth's axis meets the surface in a region of ice and cold. It is not a landmass like a continent, but rather a point in the middle of the Arctic Ocean, where thick sea ice floats on deep, dark water. The ice shifts slowly with ocean currents, drifting in gentle, almost imperceptible movements that continue day and night. This frozen surface extends in all directions, a vast expanse of white that meets the horizon without interruption. The temperature at the North Pole remains below freezing for most of the year, creating an environment where ice is the dominant feature. The cold settles over everything, a steady presence that shapes the landscape and determines what can exist in this remote place. During the winter months, the temperature drops even further, reaching depths that create an almost absolute stillness. The air is dry and crisp, and the cold seems to quiet everything, muffling sound and slowing movement. The ice at the North Pole is sea ice, formed when ocean water freezes during the long polar winter. Unlike ice that forms on lakes or rivers, sea ice is influenced by the salt in the water, which affects how it freezes and what it looks like. When seawater begins to freeze, some of the salt is excluded from the ice crystals, creating ice that is less salty than the water below it. This process happens slowly, and the ice builds up in layers over time, becoming thicker as winter continues. The surface of the polar ice is not perfectly smooth. Pressure from wind and currents causes the ice to crack and shift, creating ridges where sheets of ice push against each other. These pressure ridges can rise several feet above the surrounding ice, forming rough, irregular lines that stretch across the landscape. Between the ridges, the ice is flatter, though it may be covered with a fine layer of snow that has settled gently from the sky. The snow fills in small depressions and softens the appearance of the ice, creating a blanket of white that extends as far as the eye can see. During the polar night, which lasts for months, the sun does not rise above the horizon at the North Pole. This period of continuous darkness is not pitch black, but rather a deep twilight, with soft light coming from the moon and stars. On clear nights, the stars are visible in great numbers, scattered across the sky in patterns that seem to hold still in the cold air. The moon, when it is present, casts a pale light across the ice, creating subtle shadows and giving the landscape a quiet glow. The darkness of the polar night is not absolute because even without the sun, there is often a faint light at the horizon. This twilight comes from the sun being just below the edge of the world, its light bending through the atmosphere to reach this far northern place. The sky might take on a deep blue or purple hue, a color that seems to suit the stillness and the cold. This gentle illumination is enough to see the outline of ice ridges and the smooth stretches of frozen surface, but it is a soft, muted light that does not disturb the quiet. The aurora borealis, or northern lights, sometimes appears in the sky above the North Pole. These lights are created when particles from the sun interact with gases in the Earth's atmosphere, producing soft curtains of color that shimmer and wave across the sky. The aurora moves slowly, its green and sometimes pink or purple hues shifting in patterns that seem almost fluid. Watching the aurora is a quiet experience, as the lights make no sound and their movement is gentle, a visual presence that adds to the sense of stillness rather than disrupting it. The Arctic Ocean beneath the ice at the North Pole is deep and cold, its water just below the freezing point. This water is dark and mostly still, with currents that move slowly through the depths. The ocean here is different from warmer seas, with fewer creatures and a slower pace of life. The water supports the ice above it, providing a foundation that shifts slightly with the movement of the ocean, but overall remains stable and constant. The ice at the North Pole is several feet thick in many places, having built up over multiple winters. This thickness provides stability and creates a solid platform on the surface of the ocean. The ice is strong enough to support weight, though it may crack or shift under pressure. Beneath the surface, the ice extends down into the water, with the underwater portion of the ice being larger than what is visible above. This hidden ice is smooth and blue-green in color, a continuation of the frozen surface that exists in the dark water below. Snow falls gently at the North Pole, though precipitation is relatively light in this region. The snow that does fall is fine and dry, settling on the ice in thin layers. Over time, these layers accumulate, creating a surface that is soft underfoot. The snow reflects what little light is available, making the landscape bright even during the dim periods of twilight. Wind may move the snow across the ice, creating small drifts and patterns that shift slowly over days and weeks. The wind at the North Pole is often calm, though it can pick up at times, moving across the ice in steady currents. When the wind blows, it carries snow and ice crystals with it, creating a fine mist that hovers just above the surface. This blowing snow softens the visibility, making distant ice ridges appear hazy and indistinct. The wind itself makes a soft sound, a gentle whisper as it moves through the cold air, adding a quiet voice to the otherwise silent landscape. The concept of direction is different at the North Pole. Since it is the northernmost point on Earth, every direction from the North Pole is south. There is no east or west in the traditional sense, as these directions are defined by lines of longitude that all converge at the pole. This creates a unique situation where the usual ways of orienting oneself do not apply. Time zones also become meaningless here, as all time zones meet at this single point. It is a place that exists outside of some of the frameworks we use to organize our world. The silence at the North Pole is profound. With no trees to rustle, no rivers to flow, and very few creatures to make sounds, the environment is one of deep quiet. The ice occasionally makes sounds as it shifts and cracks, a low creaking or groaning that carries across the frozen surface. These sounds are infrequent and soft, adding to the sense of stillness rather than breaking it. The quiet is not empty, but rather full of the subtle presence of cold and ice and the slow movement of the natural world. The polar day, when the sun remains above the horizon for months, brings continuous light to the North Pole. This period is the opposite of the polar night, with the sun circling the sky without setting. The light is constant, though it changes in quality as the sun moves lower or higher in its circular path. During the polar day, the ice and snow reflect the sunlight, creating a bright environment that can be almost overwhelming. The light is soft and diffuse, spreading evenly across the landscape without the sharp shadows that occur when the sun is higher in the sky. The sun during the polar day moves in a slow circle, neither rising nor setting in the traditional sense. It stays close to the horizon, creating long, gentle angles of light that give the ice a luminous quality. The shadows that do form are long and soft, stretching across the surface in pale lines. The continuous daylight can make it difficult to sense the passage of time, as there is no night to mark the end of one day and the beginning of another. Time becomes more fluid, measured not by the cycle of light and dark but by subtler changes in temperature and wind. The ice at the North Pole is constantly in motion, though this movement is so slow it is not immediately noticeable. The ice drifts with ocean currents, moving in patterns that follow the circulation of water beneath. A piece of ice at the North Pole today might be miles away in a few weeks, carried along by the steady flow of the Arctic Ocean. This drift is part of the natural rhythm of the polar region, a continuous process that has been happening for as long as the ice has existed. Leads are cracks in the ice where open water is visible, created when ice sheets pull apart. These leads can be narrow or wide, and they reveal the dark ocean water beneath. The water in a lead is very cold, just at the freezing point, and it quickly begins to freeze over again if the temperature drops or if the ice comes back together. Leads are temporary features, opening and closing as the ice shifts, but they are a reminder that the frozen surface is not solid and unchanging, but rather part of a dynamic system. The color of the ice at the North Pole varies depending on its age and composition. Newer ice tends to be darker and thinner, while older ice is thicker and has a bright white appearance. Multi-year ice, which has survived through multiple summer seasons, is the thickest and most stable. This older ice has had time to lose much of its salt and has a clearer, more solid structure. The surface of multi-year ice may be smoother in some places, worn down by wind and melting, or it may be rough where pressure ridges have formed. The sky at the North Pole can be clear and blue, or it can be filled with clouds that hang low over the ice. Cloud cover affects the temperature and the appearance of the landscape. On cloudy days, the light is diffuse and soft, without strong contrasts. The clouds themselves are often thin and wispy, high-altitude formations that move slowly across the sky. Sometimes the clouds are thick enough to create a uniform gray ceiling, a blanket that seems to lower the sky and bring it closer to the ice. Frost forms on the surface of the ice, tiny crystals that grow in delicate patterns. This frost is created when water vapor in the air freezes directly onto the cold surface, bypassing the liquid stage entirely. The crystals catch the light, creating a subtle sparkle that adds texture to the otherwise smooth ice. Frost is most visible in the soft light of twilight or during the low sun of the polar day, when the angles of light make the small details more apparent. The air at the North Pole is very dry, with little moisture present. This dryness is one reason why precipitation is relatively light in the region. The cold air cannot hold much water vapor, and what little moisture is present often falls as fine, powdery snow. The dryness also affects how the cold feels, making it seem less harsh than it might be in a more humid environment. The air is clear and clean, without the particles or pollutants that are common in more populated regions of the world. The North Pole is far from any land, surrounded by ocean and ice in all directions. The nearest landmass is hundreds of miles away, making this one of the most remote places on Earth. This remoteness contributes to the sense of isolation and stillness that defines the region. There are no permanent human settlements at the North Pole, no structures or signs of civilization. It is a place that exists in its natural state, shaped only by the forces of weather and ocean and ice. The magnetic North Pole is different from the geographic North Pole, located in a different place and moving slowly over time. The geographic North Pole is the fixed point where the Earth's axis intersects the surface, while the magnetic North Pole is where the Earth's magnetic field points vertically downward. The magnetic pole wanders due to changes in the Earth's molten core, shifting gradually across the Arctic. This distinction is important for navigation, but at the geographic North Pole, both the constancy of the axis point and the slow drift of magnetism contribute to the unique character of the location. Ice crystals in the air sometimes create optical phenomena, such as halos around the sun or moon. These halos are formed when light passes through the ice crystals, bending and reflecting in ways that create circular rings of light. The halos are soft and subtle, adding a gentle beauty to the sky without being dramatic or flashy. Other phenomena, such as sundogs or light pillars, can also occur, each one a quiet display of light and ice interacting in the cold air. The thickness of the ice varies across the polar region, with some areas having ice that is many feet thick and others where the ice is thinner and younger. The thickest ice provides the most stable surface, while thinner ice may be more prone to cracking or shifting. Measurements of ice thickness show the natural variation in the polar environment, with pressure ridges creating areas of especially thick ice and leads revealing where the ice is thin or absent. The water beneath the ice is part of a global ocean system, connected to all the other oceans on Earth. Currents flow through the Arctic Ocean, bringing water from the Atlantic and Pacific and circulating it through the polar region before carrying it back out to warmer seas. These currents are slow and deep, part of a global circulation pattern that takes years or even decades to complete. The movement of water beneath the ice is a hidden process, unseen but constant, contributing to the overall balance of the Earth's climate and ocean systems. Polar bears do not typically venture to the very center of the North Pole, as they prefer areas where the ice meets open water and where they can hunt for seals. However, the polar region in general is their habitat, and they are adapted to life in this cold environment. Polar bears have thick fur and a layer of fat that insulates them from the cold, allowing them to survive in temperatures that would be lethal to most other mammals. They move slowly across the ice, conserving energy and waiting patiently for opportunities to hunt. Seals live in the Arctic Ocean, spending time both in the water and on the ice. They create breathing holes in the ice, places where they can come up to breathe without having to swim long distances. Seals are well adapted to the cold water, with thick blubber that provides insulation and streamlined bodies that move efficiently through the water. They are mostly solitary animals, each one occupying its own space in the vast frozen landscape. The North Pole has been the subject of human exploration for centuries, with expeditions attempting to reach this remote point. Early explorers faced tremendous challenges, traveling by foot or sled across the ice in conditions that tested the limits of human endurance. Modern expeditions may use aircraft or specialized vehicles, but the North Pole remains a difficult place to reach. The ice shifts constantly, making it impossible to build permanent structures or establish lasting routes. Each journey to the pole is unique, shaped by the current conditions of ice and weather. The depth of the Arctic Ocean at the North Pole is significant, with the water reaching thousands of feet below the ice. This deep water is cold and dark, largely cut off from the surface by the frozen layer above. The depth means that the ice floats on a vast reservoir of ocean, a body of water that extends far below and connects to the rest of the world's seas. The deepness of the water adds to the sense of the North Pole being a place of profound quietness, with layers of ice, water, and darkness stacked one upon another. The seasons at the North Pole are defined primarily by light and darkness rather than temperature changes. The transition from polar night to polar day happens gradually, with the sun remaining below the horizon for months and then slowly appearing and beginning its circular path. The reverse happens when polar day transitions to polar night, with the sun gradually lowering until it dips below the horizon and stays there. These transitions are not sudden but gentle, unfolding over weeks as the Earth continues its orbit around the Sun. The reflectivity of the ice and snow at the North Pole is very high, meaning that much of the sunlight that reaches the surface is reflected back into space. This high reflectivity, or albedo, helps to keep the polar region cold, as the surface does not absorb much of the sun's energy. The bright white ice acts almost like a mirror, bouncing light back toward the sky. This property is one reason why the polar regions remain cold even during the summer months when the sun is continuously present. Small mounds of ice called hummocks can form on the surface, created when ice sheets collide and pile up. These hummocks are irregular in shape, with rough surfaces and varying heights. They add texture to the otherwise flat landscape, creating small obstacles and variations in the terrain. Walking across a field of hummocks would require careful navigation, as the surface is uneven and the ice can be slippery. The temperature can vary slightly from one part of the ice to another, influenced by factors like wind exposure and ice thickness. Areas where the ice is thinner might be slightly warmer, as heat from the water below can more easily reach the surface. Conversely, areas with thick ice and snow cover are colder, as the insulation prevents any warmth from escaping. These variations are subtle, measured in just a few degrees, but they contribute to the microenvironment of the polar surface. The North Pole exists in a state of near-perfect isolation from the rest of the world. There are no trees, no plants, no soil, and very few animals. The environment is stripped down to its essentials: ice, water, air, and light. This simplicity creates a landscape that feels almost abstract, as if it exists outside of the normal rules that govern other places on Earth. The lack of complexity contributes to the quietness and the sense of timelessness that defines the region. Ice cores can be taken from the polar ice, providing a record of past climates and atmospheric conditions. These cores are cylinders of ice drilled from the frozen surface, and they contain layers that represent different years. Tiny bubbles trapped in the ice preserve samples of ancient air, while the ice itself holds chemical signatures that reveal information about temperature and precipitation. Ice cores are like books written in frozen water, each layer a page that tells a story of the past. The movement of the ice creates pressure ridges where sheets of ice collide and buckle. These ridges can be quite tall, rising many feet above the surrounding surface. The formation of a pressure ridge is a slow process, with ice gradually being pushed upward as two sheets meet. The ridges are rough and jagged, with blocks of ice piled on top of each other in unstable formations. Over time, wind and melting can smooth these ridges, but they remain a prominent feature of the polar landscape. The North Pole is defined by its position relative to the Earth's rotation. It is the point around which the Earth spins, the northern end of the axis that runs through the planet. This rotational axis is tilted relative to the Earth's orbit around the Sun, which is why the seasons exist and why the polar regions experience such extreme variations in daylight. The tilt causes the North Pole to be aimed toward the Sun during summer and away from it during winter, creating the periods of continuous light and continuous darkness. Icebergs do not form at the North Pole itself, as there is no land ice to carve off into the ocean. However, icebergs can drift into the Arctic region from glacier in Greenland or other northern landmasses. These icebergs are large chunks of ice that float in the ocean, with most of their mass below the surface. They drift with currents and wind, slowly melting as they move into warmer waters. An iceberg in the Arctic is a reminder of the ice that exists on land, a visitor to the polar ocean that will eventually return to liquid form. The horizon at the North Pole is distant and unbroken, a line where ice meets sky without interruption. There are no mountains, no hills, no landmarks to break the view. This flatness creates a sense of endlessness, as if the ice extends forever in all directions. The horizon is a constant presence, always the same distance away no matter which direction you look. It is a feature of the landscape that reinforces the vastness and the simplicity of the polar environment. The ice at the North Pole is in a constant state of flux, even though this change is slow. Cracks open and close, ridges form and erode, and the entire frozen surface drifts across the ocean. This movement is part of the natural rhythm of the Arctic, a cycle that has been repeating for millennia. The ice is never the same from one day to the next, yet it also remains fundamentally unchanged, always cold, always white, always present. During the brief period when temperatures rise slightly, some surface melting can occur on the ice. This creates small pools of meltwater that sit on the surface, reflecting the sky and adding a blue tint to the white ice. These pools are temporary, freezing over again when temperatures drop or draining away through cracks in the ice. The presence of meltwater is a subtle sign of the seasonal cycle, a brief interruption in the otherwise frozen state of the surface. The concept of place at the North Pole is abstract. There is no fixed location on the ice that remains in the same geographical position, as the ice is always drifting. A point that is marked as the North Pole today will have moved by tomorrow, carried along by ocean currents. The true North Pole is the geographical point where the axis intersects the surface, but reaching that exact spot requires constant recalculation as the ice beneath your feet is in motion. This creates a situation where you can be at the North Pole and yet the ground beneath you is moving, a paradox that reflects the unique nature of this place. The snow at the North Pole is mostly undisturbed, settling in layers that remain in place for long periods. Footprints in the snow, if there were any, would remain visible for a long time, as there is little to disturb them. The surface is pristine, unmarked by the activity that characterizes more populated regions. This pristine quality adds to the sense of the North Pole being a place apart, untouched and remote. The cold at the North Pole is a constant companion, shaping every aspect of the environment. It determines what forms can exist, how water behaves, and what the landscape looks like. The cold is not aggressive or harsh in the way it manifests at the pole. It is simply a fact, a baseline condition that everything else must work around. Objects brought to the North Pole become cold quickly, their heat leaching away into the frigid air. The cold is patient and thorough, eventually bringing everything to the same low temperature. The Arctic Ocean beneath the North Pole is home to microscopic organisms that live in and around the ice. These tiny creatures, including algae and plankton, form the base of the Arctic food web. They grow on the underside of the ice or in the water column, using what little light is available to photosynthesize. These organisms are adapted to the cold and the low light conditions, surviving in an environment that seems hostile to life. Their presence is a reminder that even in this remote and frozen place, life finds a way to exist. The stillness of the air at the North Pole can be remarkable. On calm days, when there is no wind, the air seems to hang motionless over the ice. There is no movement, no stirring, no breath of wind to disturb the surface. This stillness is almost palpable, a quality of the atmosphere that makes the environment feel even more remote and isolated. In this stillness, small sounds can travel far, carried across the ice without interference. The phases of the moon are visible from the North Pole during the polar night, providing a gentle cycle of changing light. The moon waxes and wanes, its appearance shifting over the course of weeks. When the moon is full, it provides more light, casting a brighter glow over the ice. When the moon is new, the darkness is deeper, with only starlight to illuminate the surface. This lunar cycle adds a rhythm to the polar night, a slow progression that marks the passage of time. The stars at the North Pole seem to rotate around a central point in the sky, a consequence of the Earth's rotation. Polaris, the North Star, appears almost directly overhead, remaining in the same position while all the other stars circle around it. This creates a unique view of the night sky, with star trails forming concentric circles if observed over several hours. The stars are bright and clear, undimmed by light pollution or atmospheric interference. The boundary between ice and water at a lead is sharp and distinct. The ice is white and opaque, while the water is dark and reflective. Standing at the edge of a lead, you can see the transition from solid to liquid, from frozen stillness to the gentle movement of water. The water in a lead may have small waves or ripples, created by wind or current, adding a sense of motion to an otherwise still landscape. Pressure from the weight of snow and the force of ice movement can cause the ice to groan and crack. These sounds are low and resonant, carrying across the frozen surface. The ice is under constant stress, pushed and pulled by currents and wind, and it responds with these acoustic signals. The sounds are infrequent but noticeable, a reminder that the ice is not completely static but rather a dynamic system that is always adjusting to the forces acting upon it. The North Pole is a place where the usual markers of human activity are absent. There are no roads, no buildings, no signs of civilization. The landscape is natural and unaltered, shaped only by the processes of ice formation and ocean movement. This absence of human presence creates an environment that feels timeless, as if it exists outside of history and human experience. It is a place that remains much as it has been for thousands of years, unchanged by the passage of time. The ice at the North Pole has a certain translucency when light passes through it. Thin ice can allow light to penetrate, creating a soft glow that seems to come from within. This quality is most apparent when the sun is low on the horizon during the polar day, casting light at shallow angles that pass through the ice rather than simply reflecting off its surface. The translucency gives the ice a luminous quality, as if it contains light within its frozen structure. The remoteness of the North Pole means that it is one of the quietest places on Earth. There are no sounds from traffic, no voices, no machinery. The only sounds are natural, the soft whisper of wind, the occasional creak of ice, and the silence that fills the spaces in between. This quietness is profound and enveloping, creating an auditory environment that is as distinctive as the visual landscape. The North Pole exists at the intersection of geography and mathematics, a point defined by coordinates but without fixed physical markers. It is a concept made real by the ice that floats above it, a place that can be visited but never truly marked or claimed. The abstraction of the location adds to its mystique, making it a destination that is as much about the idea of reaching the top of the world as it is about the physical experience of being there. The passage of time at the North Pole can feel different without the regular cycle of day and night. During the polar night or polar day, the absence of sunrise and sunset removes one of the primary ways we mark time. Hours blend together, and the distinction between one day and the next becomes less clear. Time is still measured by clocks and calendars, but the subjective experience of time can feel more fluid, less tied to the rhythms of light and darkness that govern life in other parts of the world. The ice at the North Pole contains no life larger than microscopic organisms. There are no fish swimming beneath it at the very center, no seals on its surface, no birds in the sky above. The environment is too remote and too harsh to support the kind of biodiversity found in other parts of the Arctic. This absence of visible life adds to the sense of the North Pole being a place of pure elemental forces, ice, water, air, and light, existing in a state of quiet balance. The formation of new ice is called freezing, and it happens when the temperature of the water drops to the freezing point. At the North Pole, this process occurs during the winter months, as the already cold ocean water loses what little heat it has and begins to solidify. The first ice to form is thin and fragile, a delicate skin on the surface of the water. Over time, this ice thickens as more water freezes beneath it, building up layer by layer into the solid surface that characterizes the polar region. The North Pole is a place of extremes, yet it does not feel extreme in the dramatic sense. The cold is intense, but it is steady and constant rather than violent. The isolation is complete, but it is peaceful rather than threatening. The landscape is stark, but it has a subtle beauty in its simplicity. These qualities combine to create an environment that is remarkable precisely because it is so quiet and still, a place where the Earth's natural processes unfold without interference or disturbance. The curvature of the Earth is more apparent at the poles than at other latitudes. The horizon is slightly closer, and the way light bends through the atmosphere can create unusual visual effects. Objects that are far away may appear distorted or seem to float above the ice, a phenomenon caused by the refraction of light in the cold air. These optical effects add an element of the surreal to the polar landscape, making it seem even more remote and otherworldly. The North Pole is a place where the Earth systems interact in their purest form. The ocean, the atmosphere, and the frozen surface all work together, each one influencing the others in a delicate balance. Changes in one element affect the whole system, creating a web of interconnections that defines the polar environment. This interconnectedness is part of what makes the North Pole such a unique place, a location where the fundamental processes that shape our planet are visible and accessible. The emptiness of the North Pole is not a void but a fullness of a different kind. It is full of ice and cold, of silence and light, of the slow movement of natural systems. The absence of clutter and complexity allows these elements to be appreciated in their pure form, without distraction or dilution. The emptiness is a kind of clarity, a stripping away of everything non-essential to reveal the core components of this frozen world. The sky at the North Pole can take on unusual colors during twilight periods, with shades of pink, purple, and deep blue blending together. These colors are caused by the way light scatters through the atmosphere when the sun is below the horizon. The colors change slowly, shifting from one hue to another as the angle of the sun relative to the earth changes. These twilight colors are soft and muted, adding a gentle beauty to the sky without overwhelming the quiet stillness of the landscape below. The North Pole is a place that exists primarily in the imagination for most people, a distant point on a map that represents the ultimate northern destination. Few people will ever visit it, and fewer still will spend significant time there. Yet it holds a place in human consciousness as a symbol of remoteness and challenge, a point that represents the limits of the known world. This symbolic quality adds a layer of meaning to the physical place, making it more than just a geographical location. The ice drifts in patterns that follow the circulation of the Arctic Ocean, moving in slow spirals and loops that take years to complete. A piece of ice might travel hundreds of miles as it drifts, passing through different regions of the Arctic before eventually melting or breaking apart. This drift is part of the larger system of ocean currents that circulates water and heat around the planet, connecting the North Pole to distant seas and distant lands. The North Pole is a place where the natural world operates on its own terms, without reference to human activity or concerns. The ice forms and melts according to the rhythms of temperature and season, the wind blows according to patterns of atmospheric pressure, and the ocean currents flow according to the laws of physics and fluid dynamics. This independence from human influence creates an environment that is pure and uncompromised, a place where nature is fully itself. The surface of the ice can be perfectly flat in some places, worn smooth by wind or melting. These flat areas stretch for long distances, creating plains of ice that extend to the horizon. Walking across such a surface would be easy, as there are no obstacles or irregularities to navigate. The flatness creates a sense of openness and space, reinforcing the vastness of the polar environment. The North Pole is a place of convergence, where lines of longitude from all around the world meet at a single point. It is the northern endpoint of the Earth's axis, the place where the planet's rotation becomes most apparent. This convergence creates a unique geographical situation, where the concepts of east and west lose their meaning and only south remains as a directional reference. This peculiarity adds to the sense of the North Pole being a special place, one that exists outside of normal spatial relationships. The cold at the North Pole preserves things in a state of suspension. Objects left on the ice remain unchanged, frozen in time by the low temperatures. There is no decay, no rust, no degradation from heat or moisture. The cold acts as a preservative, keeping everything in the state it was in when it was first exposed to the polar environment. This preservation creates a kind of timelessness, where the past and present exist side by side without distinction. The North Pole is a place where silence is the default state. Sound is the exception, an occasional intrusion into the prevailing quiet. The silence is not oppressive but rather peaceful, a natural condition that suits the environment. In this silence, there is space for reflection and contemplation, for the mind to settle and become still. The quietness of the North Pole is one of its most defining characteristics, a quality that shapes the experience of being there as much as the cold or the ice. The ice continues to exist, floating on the dark ocean, drifting slowly with currents that have moved through these waters for millennia. The North Pole remains at the top of the world, a fixed point in space marked by shifting ice, a place of cold and quiet where the natural world unfolds in its simplest, most essential form. The ice is there, patient and still, waiting in the cold light of the polar day or the soft darkness of the polar night, a presence that continues regardless of observation, a piece of the earth that exists in its own time and its own way.